October 2, 1954, Nashville, Tennessee, the Grand Ole Opry. Elvis Presley is 19 years old. He's about to perform on the most famous stage in country music. This is his shot, his big break, the moment that could make his career. He walks out on that stage, thousands of people in the audience, radio broadcast going out to millions more across America. He sings one song, Blue Moon of Kentucky. The audience claps politely, barely. No screaming, no encores, no nothing. Just polite, awkward applause. After the show, Jim Denny, the manager of the Grand Ole Opry, pulls Elvis aside backstage, and he says, "You ain't going nowhere, son. You ought to go back to driving a truck." Go back to driving a truck. That's what the manager of the Grand Ole Opry told 19-year-old Elvis Presley after his first and only performance there. Elvis was never invited back. One performance, that's it, banned from the Grand Ole Opry. 3 weeks later, the Louisiana Hayride hired him. Within a year, he was the biggest star in music. Jim Denny, the man who told Elvis to go back to driving a truck, made the worst prediction in music history. Let me tell you what really happened that night. First, you need to understand what the Grand Ole Opry was in 1954. This wasn't just another venue, this was the venue for country music. Started in 1925, broadcast on WSM radio out of Nashville, reached millions of listeners every Saturday night. If you made it on the Grand Ole Opry, you made it in country music. That was the rule. Hank Williams performed there, Roy Acuff, Bill Monroe, Minnie Pearl, everyone who was anyone in country music had played the Opry. And in October 1954, Elvis Presley, 19 years old, virtually unknown, still living with his parents in Memphis, got the call. Come perform at the Grand Ole Opry. This was it. This was the big time. Elvis had only been performing professionally for a few months. July 1954, just 3 months earlier, he'd recorded That's All Right at Sun Studio in Memphis. Sam Phillips, the owner, released it as a single. It got some local radio play in Memphis. People liked it. It was different, not quite country, not quite blues, something new. But Elvis was still basically unknown outside of Memphis. The Grand Ole Opry invitation was his chance to go national, to prove himself on the biggest stage in country music. He drove up to Nashville with Scotty Moore, guitar, and Bill Black, bass, his whole band, everything he had. October 2, 1954, Saturday night, Grand Ole Opry. Here's what Elvis didn't understand. The Grand Ole Opry was traditional country music, strict traditional. Bluegrass, honky-tonk, country gospel, that's what they played. Everyone dressed in cowboy outfits or formal suits. Everyone stood still while they sang. Everyone sounded like Hank Williams or Bill Monroe. That was the Opry sound, conservative, traditional, clean. And then Elvis Presley walked out. Pink jacket, slicked back hair, and when he started singing, he moved, shook his leg, got into the music physically. This was rockabilly, a blend of country and rhythm and blues, something the Opry audience had never really heard before. The song he sang was Blue Moon of Kentucky, a Bill Monroe bluegrass standard. But Elvis didn't sing it like Bill Monroe. He sped it up, added a backbeat, made it swing. Bill Monroe was in the audience that night, watching Elvis turn his song into something completely different.
The audience didn't know what to make of it. Polite applause, that's it. No screaming like Elvis was used to in Memphis, no girls rushing the stage, no multiple encores, just polite clapping. The kind you give when you don't want to be rude, but you didn't really like it. Elvis knew. He could feel it. This wasn't working. After one song, they ushered him off stage. One song, that's all he got. Most performers at the Opry did 2 or 3 songs, but Elvis just got one. He walked off stage knowing he'd bombed. Backstage, Jim Denny found him. Jim Denny was the manager of the Grand Ole Opry. He decided who performed there, who got invited back, who had a future in country music. And Jim Denny did not like what he'd just seen. According to multiple accounts, including Peter Guralnick's biography, Last Train to Memphis, Denny pulled Elvis aside and said, "You ain't going nowhere, son. You ought to go back to driving a truck." Go back to driving a truck? Elvis had been a truck driver before becoming a musician. Denny knew that. Everyone knew that. So this wasn't just, "You're not good enough." This was, "Go back to your day job. You're wasting everyone's time here." Brutal, direct, cold. Elvis was 19 years old. This was his big shot, and the manager of the Grand Ole Opry just told him he had no future in music? Elvis never performed at the Grand Ole Opry again, never invited back, not that year, not the next year, not ever. One performance, October 2nd, 1954. That's it. The Grand Ole Opry, the biggest stage in country music, rejected Elvis Presley. And you know what? Elvis was devastated. According to people who knew him, he took it hard, really hard. This wasn't some small local show. This was the show, and they told him he wasn't good enough. His mother, Gladys, tried to comfort him, told him it didn't matter, told him he was good enough. But Elvis knew what this meant. The Grand Ole Opry didn't want him. Country music didn't want him. 3 weeks later, October 16th, 1954, Elvis performed at the Louisiana Hayride. The Louisiana Hayride was like the Grand Ole Opry's younger, cooler cousin, based in Shreveport, Louisiana, less traditional, more open to new sounds. They'd heard about Elvis, heard he was different, heard the Opry didn't like him, so they invited him to perform. And the Louisiana Hayride audience loved him. Screaming, cheering, girls rushing to the front, exactly what didn't happen at the Opry. The Louisiana Hayride signed Elvis to a year-long contract, every Saturday night, a regular performer. And that's where Elvis's career really started, not the Opry, the Hayride.
By 1955, just 1 year after the Opry rejected him, Elvis was the hottest act in music. Heartbreak Hotel went to #1. He was on TV, Ed Sullivan, Milton Berle. RCA Records bought his contract from Sun Records for $40,000, an unheard-of amount for a new artist. Girls were fainting at his concerts. Parents were outraged. The media couldn't stop talking about him. Elvis Presley, the kid Jim Denny told to go back to driving a truck, was the biggest star in America. And Jim Denny, still managing the Grand Ole Opry, watching Elvis become everything Denny said he'd never be. Did Jim Denny ever apologize? Not publicly, not on the record. He died in 1963, throat cancer. He was only 52 years old. As far as anyone knows, he never publicly admitted he was wrong about Elvis, never said, "I made a mistake," never acknowledged that telling Elvis to go back to driving a truck was the worst prediction in music history. Maybe he felt bad about it privately. Maybe he didn't. We'll never know. What we do know is this: Jim Denny had Elvis Presley right there in front of him in 1954 and told him he had no future in music. 9 years later, when Denny died, Elvis was the biggest entertainer in the world. Here's the thing about the Grand Ole Opry rejection. It could have ended Elvis's career before it really started. 19 years old, first big performance, biggest stage in country music, and they tell you you're not good enough. Most people would have quit, would have said, "Well, if the Grand Ole Opry doesn't want me, I guess I'm not meant to do this." But Elvis didn't quit. He was hurt, he was embarrassed, but he didn't quit. 3 weeks later, he was on the Louisiana Hayride, and he kept going. That's the real story here. Not that he bombed at the Opry. Everyone bombs sometimes. The story is that he kept going after he bombed. And there's something else worth understanding. Jim Denny wasn't necessarily wrong in 1954. Elvis didn't fit the Grand Ole Opry. He didn't sound like country music was supposed to sound. He didn't look like country performers were supposed to look. Traditional country music fans, the Opry audience, genuinely didn't like what Elvis was doing. So from Jim Denny's perspective, he was protecting the Opry's brand, keeping it traditional, keeping it pure. The problem wasn't that Denny was a bad guy. The problem was that Denny couldn't see the future. He couldn't see that music was changing, that young people wanted something different, that Elvis's blend of country and rhythm and blues was about to change everything. Denny was protecting the past while Elvis was creating the future. And that's why You Ought to Go Back to Drivin' a Truck became the worst prediction in music history.
The Louisiana Hayride saw what the Opry didn't. They understood that Elvis was different. That different could be good. That maybe country music needed to evolve. And they were right. Within 2 years, rockabilly and rock and roll had taken over. Country music had to adapt or die. The Grand Ole Opry eventually did adapt. They started booking rock and roll artists, started evolving their sound. But by then, they'd already rejected Elvis, already told him he wasn't good enough. And Elvis never forgot that. Here's what I love about this story. It's not a story about Elvis being naturally gifted and everyone immediately recognizing his talent. It's a story about rejection, about being told you're not good enough by people who are supposed to know. Jim Denny was the manager of the Grand Ole Opry. He was an expert in country music. He'd been doing this for years. And he was completely, utterly wrong about Elvis. That should be encouraging to anyone who's ever been rejected by an expert. Experts can be wrong. Gatekeepers can be wrong. The people who are supposed to know better can miss something revolutionary happening right in front of them. Elvis Presley, rejected by the Grand Ole Opry in 1954, went on to change music forever. Jim Denny, the man who rejected him, died having made the worst prediction in music history. October 2nd, 1954, Grand Ole Opry, Nashville, Tennessee. 19-year-old Elvis Presley sang one song. The audience clapped politely. Jim Denny told him to go back to driving a truck. 3 weeks later, Elvis was on the Louisiana Hayride. 1 year later, he was the biggest star in music. 9 years later, when Jim Denny died, Elvis was the king of rock and roll. All verified, all documented, all true. If this story motivated you, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who's been rejected, who's been told they're not good enough, who's been told to give up. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been rejected by someone who was supposed to know? And did you keep going anyway? Because that's the real lesson of October 2nd, 1954. Not that Elvis was so talented he couldn't fail, but that he failed, got told he had no future, and kept going anyway. The Grand Ole Opry rejected Elvis Presley, and he became Elvis Presley anyway. Nashville, 1954. One song, one rejection, one prediction that became the worst in music history. You ain't going nowhere, son. You ought to go back to driving a truck. Wrong, Jim Denny. So completely, utterly wrong.